Climate change. It's a natural phenomenon that occurs as global temperatures rise and fall due to natural causes or human activities. But why has it become a pressing concern in recent years?
Even though climate has changed the past long years ago, the rate of change today is very much higher than the change that occurred so many thousands of years ago. And that is attributable to the greenhouse gases due to human activities.
For the past 800,000 years, carbon dioxide concentration has been on a natural up-down trajectory, with the previous high recorded at 300 carbon dioxide particles per million. But in 2020, the average has already reached over 400 CO2 parts per million in a shorter span of time.
It means that the increase in so many years compared to within the last 100 years, the change in the rate of change in the last 100 years is really phenomenal, and that is the problem. It's actually climate change. They call it a wicked problem. Wicked because it's a problem of science, a problem of environment. It is also a socioeconomic problem. So it's very complex, and it creates problem and other problems downstream.
This rapid rise in temperature is manifested in extreme weather and climate events: stronger typhoons, floods, heat waves, droughts.
These are the downstream effects. We have impacts on health, agriculture, forest, water resources, so everything. That's why we call climate change as a great equalizer, or as a cross-cutting socioeconomic, socio-political issue. The effects of more intense extreme events is actually increase in loss and damage in terms of properties, lives, and livelihoods.
A study by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change shows nations will have to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to prevent the irreversible and catastrophic effects of temperatures beyond that. In September 2021, global temperature already averaged at 1.08 degrees Celsius. So what can be done to address climate change?
One is climate change mitigation. These are actions to reduce and curb greenhouse gas emissions. And this give rise to the term low carbon development economy. Okay, when you mitigate, when you shift from the fossil fuel to a more sustainable and less polluting renewable energy. And adaptation, on the other hand, are actions taken to reduce risk and vulnerabilities to climate change. So you locate the facilities, the infrastructure in a safer place with a lower danger or threat against those structures. Landscape restoration.
But these actions don't come without consequences.
What happens to workers and frontline communities that have to deal with losses of jobs, diba, in areas that in fact give good jobs to them, or in places that they are in fact the main actors but they will no longer be the main actors. So, halimbawa, coal-fired power plants is very simple. If you close down a coal-fired power plant, what will you do with the workers, diba?
This is where the call for just transition in addressing climate change comes in.
So just transition is very simple. If we want to transition to a green, low carbon, resilient economy, kailangan natin tingnan sinong matatalo by interventions we make, which communities will suffer, and how do we help them to adjust? How do we help them to transition so that a green economy is not, diba, something that will affect them negatively?
Climate change is not limited to environmental impacts, for example, nor is it limited to economic impacts or changes. It finds its way into all issues and exacerbates them.
And a just transition will need a multi-sectoral, whole-of-society approach.
The only way that we can actually make sure that our membership are fully engaged in the struggle for climate justice is when we can connect their day-to-day struggles with the larger issues of climate justice. The particular experience that did this to us was our work with among the transport workers. So there have been many efforts of previous governments to try to introduce the idea of modernization, and which would actually include the phasing out of jeepneys and other outmoded forms of transportation. What are transport workers who have been steeped into discussions about climate change for quite some time? What they said is that, we're not against modernization if it would actually help ensure that we have cleaner air, but we don't want the government, we don't want the state to force us to pay for transport modernization, or to try to pay for cleaner air, or to pay for climate justice, because hindi naman nila kasalanan yun, di ba?
For the transport sector, Centro's Joshua Mata says there will be no modernization without just transition. This means transitioning transport workers into cooperatives, providing them government support to modernize in forms of subsidies and loans, and institutionalizing service contracting. Just transition, also a battle cry among green energy advocates.
Nagkaroon tayo ng batas on renewable energy into 2008-2009. Despite of that, ay reversal yung nangyari. When the renewable energy law was promulgated, the overall renewable energy share in the energy mix of the Philippines is around 34%. And we're now down to around 20+%. So imagine mo, reversal talaga yung nangyari sa buong power sector sa bansa natin.
And while a coal moratorium in the Philippines in 2020 has diminished coal usage, Jerry Arances of the Center for Energy, Ecology and Development says roadblocks remain in the shift to green energy.
Fossil gas has been also on the rise. And these are the players ngayon. It was just announced, yung pinakita ko kanina na around 8.9 gigawatts, ano na yan, 3 times na yan. Because San Miguel just announced around 12 gigawatts of fossil gas. So instead of us really developing our renewable energy capacity, talagang kumbaga parang paulit-ulit yung kasaysayan, inuulit na naman yung last 10 years that we were so dependent, and we've created so much dependency on coal. Now the preferred dependency is on gas, and it both are important fuels.
Arances stresses renewable energy should be the way to go.
Renewable energy in itself is so disruptive. For the first time in kumbaga sa usapin ng history ng humanity, power and energy has always been at the hands ng mga may kaya, may kapangyarihan, the corporations, because it's so centralized. And renewable energy disrupts that. Binabago na yung landscape. And so it has opened up the possibility that even the power sector will automatically be, once it is pushed and expanded, that real democracy in terms of the power sector can actually proceed.
But climate change is also a gender issue, with women already more vulnerable to poverty and disadvantaged when it comes to labor and policy-making opportunities. They become even more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The United Nations Development Program notes 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. 2 million women and children, or 4 a minute, die prematurely due to illness caused by indoor air pollution. And compared to men, women do not have easy and adequate access to funds to cover weather-related losses or adaptation technologies.
Gender inequalities intersect with climate risks and vulnerabilities. So women's historic disadvantages, their limited access to resources, restricted rights, and the muted voice in shaping decisions make them highly vulnerable to climate change.
For economist and gender advocate Maitet Jokno Pascual, a just transition involves a shift to a regenerative economy.
A regenerative economy incorporates principles of caring and sacredness, principles of cooperation that are very much and caring for nature that are very much a part of what women do, compared with the militarism of the extractive economy, or compared with you have a cooperation here in the regenerative and here in the extractive, what you have is exploitation. It's not just competition, but it's also exploitation. And then the purpose of the economy is to amass wealth and power, whereas in a regenerative economy, the purpose is for the ecological and social well-being of all.
Many countries have begun efforts for a just transition to address climate change, such as Poland's coal restructuring, Indonesia's fuel subsidy reform, Egypt's fuel price reform, and the Philippines' exploration and green jobs. But more still needs to be done.
For the Philippines, for example, we are a party to many of these multilateral environmental agreements. I don't think there has been really any rigorous study or any detailed study done looking into all of these laws and all of the actors who are involved and trying to basically make sense of all of it, trying to make it more coherent. Because one of the biggest problems that we see in the environmental sector, for example, is that there's a lot of siloism that's happening. What you really need also is an evidence-based policy making.
The recommended actions for governments and businesses is on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while enabling economic vitality. So that means that no one should be left behind if we want to reduce or mitigate GHG emission.